just go ahead and get started. But hello, everyone. As I mentioned a second ago, as people were joining the line, it's really great to see everybody here. First things first, my name is Stacey. I am the Director of Research Engagement at AVAC, and a longtime GPP champion and practitioner. And just very excited to welcome everyone to the first in this webinar series that we've titled the GPP Body of Evidence series. We've got a really exciting lineup for today, looking at GPP in TB research, kind of from discovery to delivery, and really kind of emphasizing this point that GPP is not just about a clinical trial. And I've got some really great presentations and presenters lined up for you. So I'm going to kick it over to our panel in just a minute, but wanted to kind of start out by giving everybody a little bit of context and background and sort of all the thinking that went into this body of evidence series that we're launching. AVAC is launching today in partnership with the WHO, Wellcome Trust, and the Global Health Network, and some others. And importantly, really with primary support from our USAID funded project CASPR, or the Coalition to Accelerate and Support Prevention Research. Lots of acronyms there, but hopefully they're familiar to many on this call. So just kind of two bits of background of what's sort of gone into this webinar series. The first piece is really about kind of the essence of GPP. Looking at the folks we've got on the line, I know many of us, we know GPP, we practice GPP, we're champions for GPP. We all really believe in the value of its role in clinical trials and in research even more broadly. But we also know that GPP is far from easy. It kind of looks different in every context. Its outcomes can be hard to quantify. And engagement is also seen as kind of secondary to clinical processes or to the overall research process and outcomes. And therefore, GPP is often misunderstood, it's undervalued, and it's under-resourced. So that's kind of one piece of the puzzle. The second piece is really just sort of the background of GPP. Again, everyone knows that GPP was launched in 2007. So we're going on, not to date us too much, but we're going on almost, we've got almost 20 years of GPP implementation under our belts. And we know that over the years, GPP has been, it's been updated, it's been translated, and really importantly, it's been adapted to disease and research areas well beyond HIV prevention, which is what the first edition was developed around. And so over those years, AVAC, but many other partners, research partners, civil society partners, and other groups independently from AVAC have implemented GPP in all sorts of contexts, and through all sorts of mechanisms and different geographies, et cetera, et cetera. And so while this, really reflects the essence of GPP, or kind of the science, or sort of what I always call the beauty of GPP, we realized that this sort of body of global GPP practice had never really been consolidated in one place. It wasn't accessible for people who just kind of wanted to better understand GPP, or for people who just practically wanted to understand how to implement it in or around research. So to respond to those gaps, last year, AVAC launched what we call a GPP body of evidence, and this is available on the website, and we'll pop that into the chat so you've got the link. And this really kind of serves as a sort of repository for GPP models, for kind of the GPP publications, ethical rationales for GPP, but also sort of practical tools and templates for just getting GPP done. But we didn't want to stop there. We didn't want to just stop with a web page. And so we've organized this series to really think. We've organized this series to really kind of bring these tools and those GPP lessons to the world, but also to facilitate some of these critical discussions about the challenges that I alluded to at the beginning, and really kind of think together about how can we sort of continue to be sure that we're responding to these challenges and gaps in practice, and that GPP is really elevated as core to research, but also that ultimately we are working together to continue to strengthen GPP practice and its positive impact on research. So again, we're starting today with a really exciting lineup of GPP and TB research. I think many people know that TB Alliance and AVAC worked together a number of years ago to really think about, you've got this great GPP practice in HIV prevention, but we want to really understand how to do that in TB drug trials as well. So really a solid history there, and we're excited for this lineup. And so I'm going to kick it over to my or sort of primary moderator for the call, Dr. Michele Tameris, who comes to us from the University of Cape Town in South Africa and the South African TB Vaccine Initiative, or SATV. So Michele, over to you.
Right, thanks so much. Right, as Jen said, I'm from SATV, which stands for South African TB Vaccine Initiative. We're a clinical research group based within the University of Cape Town, and I'm based at the field site where we've been doing TB vaccine, TB drug, TB diagnostic, and biomarker trials since 2001. And I've had the privilege and the pleasure of working there since 2003. So almost 21 years. It's been amazing. But working in the same community, I think, has really reinforced to me the need for GPP and the importance of it, the importance of to continually interact transparently, honestly with our community, the organizations in our community, etc. When I was approached to moderate, I just went back to look at the definition of what GPP actually is. One tends to forget, I know about GPP, and then you sort of read it. And I was interested to see this last sentence about can potentially influence the outcome, whether positive or negative. And that got me thinking, and it got me thinking about the different roles each of these named sort of stakeholders plays in our clinical work, our trials for TB. And just looking again at the typical onion picture, in my day-to-day job, I mainly have to do with community and broader stakeholders, people, the individuals, the advocates, the community advisory board, etc. And our director is very involved in national and global committees, policymakers, sitting on many, many committees, right up to the UN high-level meeting where he was one of the very few invited to speak. But I haven't been invited to speak, but before I hand over and introduce our first speaker, I think it's always a good time to remember something our great leader, Nelson Mandela, had said, which is everything that is done for me without me is done against me. And we really must see our community members as having a role beyond that as just a potential trial participants, but to engage them right from the beginning, from the protocol design, from all our planning, pre-study, the conduct of the study, and most important, to the dissemination of the results, whether they be positive or negative. We have to involve the community if we wish to say we practice good participatory practice. That's all from me from the moment. I want to now hand over to Stephanie Seidel from TB Alliance, which is involved in community and stakeholder engagement. I've worked with Stephanie on GPP for many, many years now, probably from almost the very beginning of the GPP guidelines for TB vaccine trials. And there's no one better than Stephanie to introduce you now and start our discussion about GPP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michele. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Great.
Great.
I'm just going to share my slides here. Thank you so much, Michele, and thank you, Stacey, for inviting us to join this webinar today. I'm so excited to be part of this conversation. Of course, we've worked together for a long time on GPP, and I'm just so excited about the title of the session, which is that it's not just about the trial anymore, and that's so right. I mean, GPP has come such a long way since it was first developed. It is it is surely not just about good participatory practices in HIV prevention trials or specifically TB drug trials or any other specific disease area anymore. And I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about our experience with GPP over the last many, many years in discovery, development, and delivery at TB Alliance. And of course, the bulk of our experience is in development, engagement in clinical trials, and before, during, after clinical trials, and now several years now of experience in engagement in access and delivery, which we'll talk about. For those of you that may not know me, I'm Stephanie Seidel from the TB Alliance. I lead our community engagement program and am part of our external affairs team. I developed these slides with my colleague, Dr. Robin Waite, who leads our access advocacy initiative as part of our market access team. So, of course, we're a not-for-profit organization, product development partnership, specifically focused just on the development of TB drug, new TB drug regimens that are faster acting, affordable, and better for those who need them. The TB Alliance is focused on 3 pillars, really: discovery, development, and delivery. We do have a very vast pipeline of drug candidates in all of these 3 categories: discovery, new chemical entities, and those that are in development. Drug candidates that are in clinical phases, all clinical phases, and those that are in the market. And what I want to focus on today is the fact that what TB Alliance is trying to do with engagement is really make sure that there's an arc thread through. Good participatory practices should be throughout the whole pipeline of any development process. We always want to try to engage from the very earliest stages of development until products are available and in the hands of those that will be using them. What it looks like when we're actually looking at a pipeline of drug development is really complicated, and we have to ask ourselves really key questions at every phase of development that are complicated. How are we going to actually engage at different stages of discovery and different stages of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, and at different stages of post-approval and post-recommendation and access and delivery stages. And those are things that are, ever-changing and ever-evolving with lessons learned, and strategies should become a feedback loop all the time. Strategies that we put into place and learn from and improve as we go along. That's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about today, especially in the development space and in the delivery space. I just want to go back a little bit to where we started. I love how Stacey said we're almost 20 years in, and it's true. It's hard to believe, but it's also something we love, and it's really a pleasure to have been working with amazing people for so long. It's true. TB Alliance has been doing community engagement in its work for nearly 20 years. And it's true that good participatory practice has been a cornerstone of this strategy from the very beginning. When we started in our first phase 3 clinical trial in 2007, community engagement was a part of that strategy. And starting from scratch at that time, we had to develop new models for engagement in TB R&D. Where to begin, of course, good participatory practice was really a roadmap at that time. Others like CDC, TBTC was doing engagement in TB research, which was incredibly important at that time. But at the research site level, not a lot of researchers knew what they were doing with engagement at the research site level, which made it very difficult. And unless researchers had previous experience in HIV prevention trials, engagement really wasn't on their radar. And the why and how and the how are we going to support this and what's your role in this and what's my role in this was not something that really anyone knew how to make sense of. So this was a long road that we were on starting back then. And the strategy that TB Alliance took, and this wasn't alone, I will say that we had a large group of advisors at that time that included AVAC, included TBTC, included others with a lot of experience in engagement and ethics and HIV prevention research and engagement, advised us on the best models we could consider for engagement in phase 3 TB drug clinical trials at that time. And we stumbled on something that we actually still use today, which is a different model than I think most other sponsors may use. I'm going to talk just a little bit about that, and then I'm going to move on because I know we have a lot to go through in a little bit of time. But we fund community engagement programs directly to research sites. And at the time, I think that was a little bit funny. And sometimes now we always go back and we say, oh, this is a different model. We talk to partners, we're like, well, this is still a different model. Why do we want to do this? And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because there's a really important reason why I think this works for a reason. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about GPP and the role and responsibility I think sponsors have in ensuring that GPP can take place. And I'm just going to talk about that a little bit. But over the long period of time that TB Alliance has been implementing GPP, not just at the research site level, but really at all levels, we have engaged early, we have engaged throughout, we engage late, and we have really developed one of the largest networks of research site level engagement mechanisms for TB drug clinical trials that I'm aware of. And again, this is not alone, this is through partners and with partners. And we try to do this as soon as sites are selected and through the time that final results are published and fully disseminated to those that need to receive that information. We have committed to setting a precedent for supporting engagement strategies from any phase 2, phase 3 clinical trial that is of 8 weeks or longer. We can talk about what that means and what other phase 2 clinical trials could be supported at the research site level. And this is where we ask ourselves other questions about how do we support engagement strategies around discovery and other phases of research in other ways that may not be the same kind of model that we're using in development. But what we've learned in this model is that we've been helping to build a sustainable model of CE at research site levels, and also committing to engagement at all levels across the entire discovery, development, and delivery pipeline. This is just a note back to what Stacey said too. We've been at this for a really long time. I know GPP was originally developed in, I think you said 2009, 2007, and it was reissued again in 2011. And we did work with AVAC, TB Alliance, but with a consortium of other partners, critical path of TB drug regimens, and other partners, including many of those that are on the call today and others that are on this panel, to develop a GPP guideline specific for TB drug trials, because TB drug trials are unique. The patient participant population is unique. Treatment trials are different than prevention trials. And these guidelines are still used and available, and it's really nice to have them. But one thing that we've learned over all these years is that these guidelines are useful in any form and every form. They are disease agnostic, really, and they have been adapted to many other diseases over the years, and that's incredibly helpful. It can sometimes be very useful to have specific tools that make sense for the trials you're doing or the disease you're working on or the community that you're working in, and to document the specific strategies that you're going to use. But the bottom line is that GPP as it exists in its original form is really a framework that works for any setting. And so we really kind of rely on that in its original form after all these years. And I just wanted to mention that. This is what I wanted to come back to, the model that we stumbled upon of funding site level engagement strategies directly. There's something that I love about GPP, and it's the role and responsibility elements. Understanding that everyone involved in an R&D process has a role and a responsibility in good participatory practice. What does that mean? We focus a lot on who's implementing good participatory practice, and we often focus on those that are implementing engagement strategies at a grassroots level, who's actually on a community advisory board, who's actually doing the engagement with civil society. But how does that work actually happen? It happens if there is an enabling environment for that work to happen. And as a sponsor, TB Alliance takes it very seriously to make sure there is an enabling environment for that work to happen. And that happens through several things that we've been focusing on for many years. Obviously, there's a priority to support research literacy at the community level where research is happening, providing opportunities for cross-site or cross peer-to-peer learning opportunities, because the knowledge of how to do engagement and implement GPP really does exist where research is happening. Leadership, supporting the development and promoting leadership from community engagement leadership from the sites, because as a sponsor, this is our job to support the amazing work that is happening, not to guide it in any particular way. We're working as a partnership, and so we want to provide the enabling environment. A lot of this is done through funding mechanisms. Let's be very clear about that. We do support engagement through grants, and we do that to make sure that there is funding for this legitimate practice, this legitimate job of engagement that has to happen at whatever level you're engaging. It's not going to happen magically. And so we do take that very seriously, and we do support those strategies early and through results dissemination. And we work with all of our partners on a shared commitment to GPP. So this is why we continue with the model of funding CE strategies the way we do, separate from clinical trial budgets, because it gives site teams a lot more freedom and autonomy to plan their activities, to decide for themselves how they're going to do engagement. And it really does shine a lot more light on what's happening with engagement overall. And I think that that's the way we're going to continue doing that. I'm sorry. These are principles of community engagement. I know this looks very similar to what you might find in a GPP manual, and it's not all the same words, but I just wanted to share these because they're really important to us. The responsibility, again, going back to roles and responsibilities, enabling and participating in engagement. Everyone has a role and responsibility to participate in engagement, from the sponsor, the donor, the PIs, everyone on the clinical trial, and really everyone along the R&D continuum. It's not just those that are implementing or doing the engagement themselves. Providing an environment for a sustained engagement practice to take place. Proactively seeking input and consultation with stakeholders throughout the process of R&D. And maintaining a level of respect with local stakeholders where we're building an understanding of the needs and implementing those needs into the way we conduct clinical trials. strengthening partnerships and relationships at the local level, and to the best of everyone's ability, maintaining transparency and preparing stakeholders for outcomes of research, advocating together and joining our partners in the fight to end TB. I'm going to just go through this quickly. I hope the slides will be shared, but there's many lessons learned here, and I'll just go over this very quickly. In the development space, we have learned so much from the strategies we've used to engage during clinical trials. Clinical trials work better when we're engaging well. Clinical trials work more smoothly. Clinical trials are more trusted. Enrollment happens more smoothly. Retention is more is higher when there is a strong engagement strategy. Depending on the clinical trial that you're conducting, engagement strategies are essential. The trial could not take place at all. And one thing I just want to highlight is that in sites that we work with where those that are responsible for implementing engagement strategies that have been incorporated into research teams and really elevated and given that legitimacy that I've been talking about, that's where this works the best. And I just want to put a call out there that part of what I think we need to do moving forward is to reframe the roles we have for those that do engagement, those that plan engagement, because I think that we're missing a lot, and we're missing a lot of understanding of those that are responsible for this work, especially when it happens at the site level, as opposed to the global or regional level. They're not mutually exclusive. There's a real important role for everyone that's engaging along the whole continuum of research. And we need to work on legitimizing all of those roles. I just want to share a specific case example in development, a Siemens study that we just concluded in at TB Alliance, which is was a post-market commitment from the FDA that we had to enroll 20 males to a Siemens study analysis to check for testicular toxicity of the BPAMZ regimen. And this trial, as I said, would not have been possible without a coordinated engagement strategy. So not only was it critical that there be an engagement focus on this, but it was a coordinated strategy across multiple sites. And it mostly led the clinical team's approach to enrolling for this study. So this is our engagement lead for the whole global study, and he recently presented his outcomes at the conference in South Africa last week, which is part of what we want to see from the outcomes of engagement. I'm sure I'm over time, but I'm going to just keep going. Just stop me when I'm over. So as you can see, a bulk of our experience is in development and engagement, but with the BPAL regimen being approved and recommended for use globally in the last few years, we have really shifted our engagement practices into access and delivery over the last few years. So I want to focus a little bit on that. And my colleague Robin will be able to answer some questions during the Q&A session as well. Being able to secure access to new TB treatments for all, this is a multi-pronged approach of working with high burden countries and with community and civil society partners to raise awareness at multiple levels, raising awareness in education, doing in-country advocacy, building political will and having political engagement, and doing community education and building capacity of community level partners to be able to understand the new treatments that are available and to demand the products that are available to them. This is just a deeper look at some of the materials that are being developed at the country level with civil society partners to educate TB affected individuals about DRTB regimens that have become recommended now for treatment, to educate them about, just building treatment literacy, not research literacy, And empowering communities to become a part of the new treatment solutions, helping to find the missing people that are not being diagnosed, but also being a part of the groundswell of demand for new treatments to move the local policy in country to change guidelines and to procure products and to introduce in local countries so that individuals with DRTB can have access to these treatments more quickly. There are many different ways that this is happening. So training manuals may be used in a grassroots level, and there's also a lot of digital advocacy happening, public awareness campaigns, raising awareness and education through a Fast Track the Cure initiative. This is a digital platform through multiple partners I just want to get it right. This is Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, with civil society organizations that are using platforms online to share stories and testimonials of survivors with TB, raising awareness about the new treatments and showcasing facts about the new regimen. Also building, highlighting stories from local politicians that are supportive of these new regimens so that there can be kind of a multiple level support online that people are seeing and can get involved in. And this is an ongoing campaign that is growing and will be hopefully expanding to multiple areas, and is something that you can visit on the Fast Track the Cure Instagram page and see how widespread this is. This is another example of building political will and doing political engagement. In the Philippines, our civil society partners at TB People Philippines have been engaging with many politicians at the local level. This example in particular is with a mayor, Lucy Torres Gomez, who's very supportive of the introduction of new regimens in their district, and shared a video of support to be a champion for the introduction and rollout of new treatments. And this has been shared as well to inspire more political action and support for introduction of new products. So we do know that strong civil society and building political will can really accelerate the introduction of new treatments at the country level and help to provide access more quickly. And expanding the information, access to information about new products can also drive demand for new products across civil society and those that need products. Another way that information is being shared and engagement is happening is through peer-to-peer knowledge sharing. So an initiative also that's housed in the Philippines, but it's focused on country national TB program management introduction level training, is a peer-to-peer knowledge hub, or a PeerLink knowledge hub training program, where those countries that have experience implementing operational research trials with BPAL and have experience implementing new products like BPAL in countries can train other countries that are looking to introduce these products and meet together to share experience and give examples of how best to introduce new products at the country level. Ultimately, this can be a very nice peer-to-peer learning model where this information can be shared from country to country. So far, I believe 5 or 6 countries have been trained during this in this model, and it will continue. And we hope that this will help accelerate the introduction of BPAL across new countries that have not yet introduced. So
so sorry to interrupt, but just maybe a couple more minutes. This is amazing, but
This
don't
is,
want to get too
this
over.
is the end.
Thank you.
Yeah, this
Great.
is the last slide. So yeah, so just to say that, you know, of course, GPP is the framework for how we've really developed our engagement strategy across development and what we've learned for how to approach engagement and access. But we do want to also say that there are a lot of other guidance tools available that we find very important, including the guidance on engagement and of communities and civil society to end tuberculosis from the WHO Civil Society Task Force, which has been an important guiding document in developing strategies for access. So with that, I'll just say that, you know, we want to thank all of our donors, and I would like to give a special thanks to our donor USAID, who has been an incredible long-standing supporter of good participatory practice and community engagement, not just at TB Alliance, but I know at AVAC and across many partners. Supporting engagement has been very helpful in our programs, and we are very grateful to USAID for that support. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. You've certainly given us a lot to think about and to go back to, and we'll definitely go back to the recording. And I just want to take 20 seconds to thank TB Alliance for funding community engagement models at trial sites, because there are very, very few people who do this. And it's so very essential if we want community engagement and good participatory practice to actually happen. It's not something that can happen unfunded. We're running over time already, and I'm going to quickly ask that we don't have any question time now, so that we can continue to our next speaker and still hold, if you can hold any questions, please, for after all the speakers have finished, so that we can try and keep to our time. Our next speaker is Erica Lessem, who's the Director of Community Engagement at the Community Engagement Across the Research Continuum Smart for TB's model is her talk, and she'll come right up.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks everyone. I will try to make up a little bit of time, because I think there's a lot of overlap between some of the things Stephanie presented and the approach that we're taking as Smart for TB. So I'll try to focus on kind of new information and hopefully make up a little bit of time for us. And I apologize in advance. I just had a little bit of problems with my internet. So if I somehow get kicked off, please go ahead without me, and then I can come back on later. So what I'll cover in today is what is Smart for TB, because I imagine many of you haven't heard of it yet, our approach to community engagement, and then how we're kind of moving from this idea of GPP and principles of community engagement to actually implementing this in our work. So Smart for TB is kind of at the other end of the spectrum. Stephanie mentioned they've been working in this space for over almost 20 years. Smart for TB is a relatively new project. We just started in late 2022, and this is similarly a USAID funded initiative. So again, a shout out to our sponsor for really prioritizing community engagement. And I think something that's really interesting to note was they actually had 4 named positions in the call for this grant for Smart for TB, and one of them was a community engagement manager, which is the role that I took, and have expanded a little bit to also include policy work. So I just wanted to kind of highlight the importance of this being a priority for funders as well, in terms of really ensuring community engagement and adherence to good participatory practice and trials. Like the TB Alliance, we do treatment research, but we're also working on diagnostics and operational research. And this is a very large consortium. We're doing things like vaccine preparedness. So we work with researchers, educators, policymakers, and advocates across the globe. And this is currently a 5-year project. So we have multiple partners who are part of Smart for TB. I'm not going to name them all here, just in the interest of time. And we work on several different areas, like I mentioned. So one thing that we'll talk about is kind of approaching community, an approach to building in community engagement into all of these different areas, not only into clinical trials, which is also clearly very important. So our mission is fourfold: to advance research by identifying more effective methods to find, treat, and prevent TB, and to have that research really drive policy change. You know, it's not enough to just produce results. We want to make sure that that has an impact, and the first step towards that is working with the WHO and with TB programs at the national level to influence their policy. We also are working to strengthen local capacity. So we're building research capacity among early stage, or supporting research capacity among early stage investigators in the countries where we're working, and offering opportunities for mentorship and grant development support and research proposals development support. And then, you know, the reason that we're all here today is to talk about engaging communities, and in particular finding, you know, the optimal approaches for doing that across this very large consortium with a pretty broad scope and a lot of areas in it. So how are we doing this? Or first, why? You know, I think Stephanie covered a lot of this. This is from our internal standard operating procedures on community engagement. And you can see here, you know, some of the benefits of engaging communities. I think Michele and Stephanie already covered a bunch of this, so I'll keep moving on this slide, but happy for you all to refer back to it later. And the who, we're working with several different levels of community engagement. And I think this is something interesting and important to think about. You know, in the TB space, a lot of work has been done by many of the people on this call today, and others, to really build up the ability of communities to engage in research and the, you know, access that they have for doing that. And so we're working in Smart for TB kind of at multiple levels, engaging communities. We have regional community advisory boards that represent the 3 regions you can see on the map here: Eastern Europe, Central Asia, the Asia Pacific region, and then the African region, where we are conducting most of our project activities. We also work with the Global TB Community Advisory Board, which is an independent group that is helped to be coordinated by Treatment Action Group. And they, you know, give input on many different research and access issues in TB, you know, outside of Smart for TB, but they're also working with us too. And then site level CABs, as Stephanie had talked about earlier. So Smart for TB primarily works with regional CABs. And so I'll talk about this a little bit more. These are our 3 partners. We work with APFRO-CAB, APCASO, and the Eurasian Community for Access to Treatment, or ECAT. And these were all pre-existing organizations. They predated Smart for TB, but not all of them had been involved in kind of specifically in research engagement, and not all of them had been involved in TB in particular before. So it's been really great to work with them and kind of bring more different perspectives and different groups representing many different countries in these regions kind of into the TB research space. So community engagement is at the core of everything that we do. Regional CABs are the primary mechanism for this, like I mentioned, and they also serve as kind of a nexus point for interactions with a broader constituency of community and civil society stakeholders. And as I mentioned, we try to work at all 3 of these kind of levels, both to inform the research, but also to help drive the translation of research into policy in keeping with our mission. So this is just to kind of give an example of how we work across these 3 different levels. This is again from our internal kind of guide to how to do community engagement within Smart for TB. So you can see all the way on the left, we have the regional CABs. In the middle, we have our global TB CAB, and then we also have site level CABs. And this is to give kind of some guidance towards our clinical research teams about how they should engage groups at these different levels. So you can see the regional CABs are involved, you know, for the most part, pretty much across the board throughout the research lifecycle. The global CAB we involve, you know, in some of these bigger picture questions like setting agenda for Smart for TB research, and definitely in terms of reviewing the protocol and disseminating results and advocating for policy translation and uptake of new tools when we have new tools to uptake. And then lastly, the site level CABs kind of come in at a slightly later stage. There might already be a full protocol by the time that, the sites are included. So the site level CABs only get included at this later stage, but they have a real important role in terms of reviewing some of the materials and plans, and also conducting activities that are really driven, like Stephanie had been talking about earlier, at the site level and at the community level. So hopefully that gives you just kind of a snapshot about our approach to working across multiple different levels of community groups. And what we are doing, in addition to bringing, the CABs into the Smart for TB space, we are helping develop some tools to help strengthen their capacity for working in TB and on research in particular. So the capacity strengthening that I mentioned earlier isn't only for the research teams, but it's also for community groups. And as part of this, our partners at Treatment Action Group have developed a bunch of materials that we're calling CAB Lab, which is an online, really comprehensive course or curriculum on TB research that's designed and specifically geared towards affected communities and civil society. The regional CABs that we work with already went through kind of this first phase of participating in CAB Lab and have given us a lot of really positive feedback, and also given us some ideas for how we could expand and improve upon CAB Lab in the future. So now we're in the process of kind of making this a more broadly available resource, and that we hope to share with all of you soon. Probably in the next few months, we'll be having our updates available, which include having the CABs actually create some modules themselves for sharing with the broader community. And then we're also going to be translating this into a few key languages where some of our partners are working, Russian and French. So the idea of this is really to kind of democratize this knowledge that was first and foremost developed for the Smart for TB CABs, but that we hope can really benefit groups more broadly who are interested. So for those of you, I saw in the chat, it looked like many of you are kind of involved in research networks, either at a kind of site coordinating level or maybe even involved in community engagement directly. So in a few months, we really would love to make, we hope to make this all available, and that this is something that you could use in your settings as well, to help kind of capacitate groups that might be participating, or individuals that might be participating in TB research engagement. So I'll go kind of just quickly over this slide because I think it kind of mirrors some of the things that Stephanie presented, but the idea is really to build throughout Smart for TB, to build community engagement all the way across the research to policy process. And I'll give you some specific examples of kind of how we actually make this work. But you can see, all the way on the left of the spectrum, we have research agenda and priority setting. That gets, concretized in protocol development. Then there's the actual trial implementation and conduct itself, and then disseminating the results, and then translating into policy and eventual uptake, which includes a strong community component for demand generation and adoption. And I'll just say, for now at Smart for TB, we're kind of between these two blue dots on the left here. So we have some protocols in development, some are already developed, and we're on the cusp of starting to get into trial implementation since we're a newer project. So some of this is kind of plans for what we'll be doing in the future. So what are we actually doing concretely? Well, when we think about this research agenda and priority setting, we're involving, the global CAB and the regional CABs that we work with in these discussions up front. And so you can see here some quotes that we've gotten from feedback from our community engagement, when they've been reviewing protocols or participating in some agenda setting discussions. So you can see here, they've been encouraging us to include considerations around access as we are starting to do diagnostics research. So what they're saying here is, from the outset of selecting diagnostic companies to work with on kind of supporting their product development, that we should think about building access in from the outset. And that is something that we are working to do. In one of our trials, in two of our therapeutics trials, we're including pregnant people, and we're also including children, and these are often neglected populations in TB research. So this was something that we heard a lot of support from the CABs. And you can also kind of see on the right here, it actually kind of got built into a much broader initiative to really catalyze the inclusion of pregnant people in TB research, pregnant and lactating people in TB research much more broadly, even outside of Smart for TB. So Smart for TB is partnering with the World Health Organization, and we partnered with the Impact Network to launch a kind of kickoff meeting in late 2023, and now WHO is spearheading a process all about, early and appropriate inclusion of pregnant people in research. And we expect guidance from WHO to kind of be forthcoming on that in 2025. So that's been really exciting and something that community support has been really integral to. And community members were invited to this meeting and also issued their own community statement, even ahead of kind of the WHO work, to call for and advocate appropriate inclusion of pregnant women and other pregnant individuals in research safely and ethically. We've also been encouraged from the CABs to include assessments of patient preference, which we're planning to do. And they've also given us a lot of encouragement kind of in terms of thinking about how to do this work and how to engage with CABs and think about overcoming language barriers. So that's something that we've been trying to take forward too, is, not just making kind of language accessible to people in terms of not using overly technical language, but also, literally in just making sure that there are translations available so that some of our regional CAB members who don't speak English fluently can still participate in these processes. Kind of moving down a little bit towards through this kind of research to policy spectrum, there's protocol development and then trial implementation and conduct. So we have regional CAB members on our protocol teams, and then the full regional CABs get the opportunity to review every single draft protocol as it's in fairly early stage development, so that their input can actually be meaningfully incorporated. Also, in our diagnostics work, they're participating in the process of selecting which diagnostics we're investing in. Will kind of move towards the next stage of investment and development. And they're also engaging in our vaccine preparedness work by reviewing study instruments. We're also, even though Smart for TB hasn't completed research yet, and we don't kind of have our own results to disseminate and demand generation activities to support for Smart for TB funded initiatives, we are already thinking about kind of how to create an enabling policy environment and how to work with community groups to advocate for the best available tools to fight TB. So as part of that, we see that it's really important to make sure that the best available standards of care are available in all settings where people with TB are treated, regardless of whether those were developed by Smart for TB. So there's a broader campaign that predated Smart for TB called the 146 by 24 campaign, all about getting shorter regimens to people who need them. And Stephanie mentioned earlier the work around the 6-month regimen. So the 6 that you see here in the 146 campaign is the TB Alliance's 6-month pretominid containing regimen. There's also a 1-month TB preventive therapy regimen or a once-weekly regimen that's given over 12 weeks. And then the 4 is for a 4-month drug susceptible TB regimen. So we now have shorter all oral treatments to treat every form of TB. And we really want to make sure that these get taken up, because we know sometimes, that the process of going from from research to WHO guidance to actually being taken up in the field, there can often be a lag. So we are already working on kind of this demand generation and adoption and policy translation with research that has been conducted by other groups. And we actually think, this is really important to do from a human rights perspective, but it also gives us the chance to, really make sure that countries are kind of in the habit and ready to adopt new technologies as they come down. So we think that this will be kind of helping to create an enabling environment for Smart for TB research results in the future as well. And we're really just getting started. We've only been working with our regional CABs for a year now, and the studies themselves are just kind of getting off the ground. So just showing you here kind of a snapshot of what's to come in terms of, this is another piece from our internal guidance on how to do community engagement in the research. And so we want to make sure that there's thinking ahead to any need for involving communities in the study implementation itself. And then also, thinking ahead to post-trial results sharing and uptake. So that is it for my presentation, and I'm looking forward to discussing with you more in the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erica. And again, in the interest of time, I mean, these have just been amazing presentations, but we are over time. And so I'm going to quickly kick it over to our final speaker, Masingita Lambane, who's the head of strategic partnerships and community systems at Think. So Masingita, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. I hope my screen is visible. I'm not good with Zoom. I hope it's clear now.
Looks great. It looks great.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So my name is Masingita Lambane. I work for Think, and I'm responsible for strategic partnerships and strengthening community systems. And just to give you a background in terms of who Think is, we were founded in 2012. We have our head office in Durban in KZN, and we have a presence in about 4 provinces in South Africa currently. And we pride ourselves in making a difference in the lives of those who are affected by TB and HIV. And I think our community work has been the biggest testimony in terms of this commitment and to this purpose of making a difference. And I'll try to move fast also just to make, provision for time, and also because some of the things I'll cover, Erica and Stephanie also spoke to. But I think what's of interest in terms of our approach to research and public health interventions has been our drive in ensuring maximum awareness raising at community level. This is more at granular level to ensure that we influence a certain type of change in behavior, particularly if you look at interventions that speaks to specific groups like priority populations, men, particularly when it comes to TB, and eventually we drive a process where at a granular level also we encourage healthcare seeking behavior, which speaks to prevention model, and vaccines, PrEP, IPT, for example, comes in terms of that intervention. And eventually what we encourage also, and this is what we've been doing at activities that we've been doing practically at communities that we work in, has been to push for mass screening for various kind of diseases, and the reason for that is with mass diagnostics, we ensure that there's been a process of diagnostic of people who will be in those pockets of society where we're doing that screening, and eventually those people get referred to or linked to care and have the opportunity to participate in some of the benefit from some of the work that we have contributed towards in terms of TB research, for example, the improved drugs and also shorter regimens. So this is just a broader picture of who our community engagement aspect in terms of driving change at a community level. I'll speak particularly now to our GPP journey, which I think is the core of why I'm here today and why we have an audience to listen. So my colleagues Erica and Stephanie spoke to this before, but I think we all know by now that it's GPP speaks to a set of guidelines, and particularly to drive or to ensure meaningful and ethical involvement. And our critical part in terms of participation, there is stakeholders at a community level, which will be the participants, the researchers, and also the broader community. And the idea is to facilitate research and policy-making processes. And I think Stephanie touched on the fact that originally the idea was HIV, prior to looking at GPP for TB trials. And I think from our experience at a community level, following, this process and also guided by this definition, we've managed to ensure collaboration, drive respect and transparency, and ensure that there's maximum participation in terms of our interventions at a community level. We see GPP differently, I think, and not just differently from everyone else, but looking at it differently has helped us to understand certain things, and ensure that there's more engagement. For example, we see ourselves coming with systems, processes, guidelines and systems in a community. And the first thing that, any community member will start to ask themselves is to assess that, to see, is this genuine? Does it speak to us? Is it driving optimism? Are we going to see a different? Is it progressive? And also originality in terms of, does it involve us? And that will be the next step, getting involved. And our experience has been that if you ensure that there's maximum involvement of community members in terms of people, in terms of community structures, in terms of different kind of bodies that you find in the community, and also regulators and enforcers, you will find that there's greater collaboration and engagement and interaction. And based on that, then you eventually have people who are involved in a process to drive change. And driving change means that you have methods and approaches, routines and exercise that are embedded strongly on, societal norms. So this is recognition of culture, recognition of prior knowledge, also ensuring that this strong values clarification process, ensuring that there's maximum participation from all corners of society and no one is left behind. The stakeholder engagement framework is something that I think most of people will be familiar with by now, starting with identifying who's in the community, who is the stakeholder that we would be interested in getting on board. But it's not always who we want to get on board. It's basically identifying who is out there in a community. And then the next step will be categorizing in terms of, the project interest and also what we want to get out of the engagement. And then our experience has been from this process, then we're able to create a stakeholder plans and stakeholder directly, which sort of advises us in terms of who should we keep closer and who do we monitor and who do we continue influencing to ensure that they participate in the process. But also strongly, it's the fact that this provides an opportunity to conduct surveys at a community level, to do focus group discussion, and also I think those who are familiar with community-led monitoring will know that it's very important also to ensure that you get a feedback from the community in order to use that information to strengthen, the interventions going forward. So the last process, of course, is, looking at where are we. We review the plans and we review our approaches and our communication tactics, and then we improve on that and we move on and strengthen the interventions. This is just a process that sort of we follow to ensure that we have more involvement and participation from the communities. And I think the keywords there will speak to some of the key things that if they strongly drive your approach, you definitely will guaranteed, a maximum participation from the community. And the first one will be looking at local strength and resources, and also this you use to increase awareness. For example, in certain communities, you'll find that taxi drivers have a bigger voice. Traditional healer practitioners have a bigger voice. Structures like your community, your AIDS, district AIDS council, local AIDS council have a certain level of strength to ensure a broader awareness into all pockets of society. I think the next stage then we'll be looking at this population, as I said, or these structures, and said, how do we blend together and how do we ensure that we drive this process towards achieving common goals and identifying common challenges, and also prioritization and continuous coordination, communication to align efforts. So meetings at a community level, stronger engagement, participation in terms of dialogues, and also just, using various platforms like WhatsApp to ensure that information flows and information flows and everyone is at the, at the same level in terms of what information is available and what is new. One of the things that we'll find very valuable is sharing resources that you have, because at the end of the day, you're also giving back into the community to ensure sustainability of, not just this program. And I think it helps to create an enabled environment for learning continuously, where you'll find certain communities might not have, the privilege of having certain resources to uplift themselves. I think this goes as far as also including learning material that we have, learning material. For example, in PMB, we printed quite a number of, GPP manuals for local organizations also to familiarize themselves and understand the whole principle of, a GPP. And I think one of the other important things is jointly monitor and evaluate, in order to make sure that awareness raising efforts and eventually the uptake of the services that we're providing. If it's a new trial, for example, if there's a joint monitoring between the trial team, the community engagement team, and the CAB in this instance, which represents the community, eventually you have more participation in the intervention. This is just our approach to pre-study and post-study approach. And I think most will be familiar with this, where the first thing is create a certain level of hype in the community, create awareness, just for people to know about, there is this trial that might be coming and all. There's this project that we might be launching in the community, and we'll do this in various ways: meetings, public seminars, door-to-door visits using community healthcare workers, using various community structures, using platforms like your faith-based arenas or churches, and also engaging in various local ward committee meetings, street meetings, clinic meetings. And eventually the next steps will be towards setting up a CAB. And from our side, our experience has taught us that if we develop terms of reference for setting up the CAB and discuss the study aims and purposes and benefits on a broader level, then you have people who then come forward and show interest in being part of the CAB. So we make it as democratic as possible. And then the next step will be setting up the CAB and adopting a constitution, which is, another, set of guidelines to advise in terms of how this body should be run, and what are the do's and don'ts, and what are the limits, and also guiding the whole research process in terms of making sure that there's acceptability. We've done this for multiple of studies, and we'll find it to be very effective and efficient, and increase in terms of community buy-in. And Erica spoke about the post-study process. I won't spend much time on that, but I think we know that CABs also become very critical in terms of, dissemination of results, and also certain structures in the community in terms of creative platforms that you use to feedback, to give information about what the intervention was about. Our GPP-driven journey, actually, I think, has, and this has been mainly, using community-led approaches to contribute towards TB diagnostics, and also recruitment for TB trials. And we started a long time ago, but I joined Think about 3 years ago. And when I joined Think, one of the things that I noticed was we had a shared CAB with MRC. MRC is one of the organizations that also works locally here. We have a good relationship, but I think from our side, we noticed, this was for our NCAA study, we noticed that there might be some bias in terms of sharing a CAB, and we moved on during that time to revise our CAB formation process or approach, and we develop our terms of reference, and we looked at issues around governance. We look at issues around, ensuring that it's more GPP oriented, and also compliance in any other form. And when we moved into NC009 now, and also for our other USAID funded project, we started to use the GPP model as, one of the approaches for scaling up of our models. And this has been from, GPP, from design, and also in terms of practice at a community level. And for our USAID loan, and now we're on a USAID funded project called Accelerate 2, and also in NC009. One of the things that we'll find very beneficial is the transparency and the openness that is driven by the GPP driven approach, and we found this to be so beneficial that we have actually scaled up to most of our other programs, except the current NC009 funded project by TB Alliance. We even went as far as advising the legislature in KZN and the civil society forum in terms of launching the TB caucus in KZN, which was first, never done before. And we use the GPP approach in terms of multi-stakeholder coordination, multi-stakeholder engagement, participation, acceptability, and also addressing things around, sensitive issues around the launch. What have we learned? So, planning and executing initiatives, definitely community-led interventions enables that, and members who are part of that process actually are able to take that strength and plan better and execute better. And in terms of understanding issues around cultural appropriateness and also ensuring sustainability, I think this has been very helpful for us to understand that one of the things that we need to establish first is what are the community needs and what needs to, to change, and what are the challenges. And if these are going to be barriers, how do we work around it? If cultural appropriateness is going to be a barrier to participation in a research trial, we need to find a way of going around that, and that means getting the community involved. And community members have also helped to monitor and evaluate these initiatives. This has taken a certain level of training and equipping, and capacity building has always been a core in terms of this. And this is one of the initial things that our GPP training actually takes place far before we even say we are starting with, recruitment. Once we've set up a camp, the next step will be to get anyone involved to go through this. And transparency, very crucial, and openness also, because it helps us. Our community engagement efforts based on that means that we're able to share explicitly what exactly is involved in this undertaking, and what are the risks and what are the benefits of the community. And I think one of the things that eventually we picked up is the fact that we leave communities empowered. We leave communities with empowered community members with the necessary tools, with the necessary skills and expertise to manage, interventions better. And we don't really get too involved. We let this process be driven by the community, which we have strengthened. Bodies in the communities, like, for example, your CAB, if it's strengthened with the right skills, you'll find that the outcome is always, or the yield is always, greater than the initial investment. And we might look at it as an expense, but we also want to look more on it as strengthening systems that are more responsive, and ensuring that, the response mechanisms also contribute to the bigger picture. If it's a research trial, it contributes to that. And I think we all agree that when you strengthen community member skills, you empower them, and also they are more free to participate in terms of decision-making and intervention. And in conclusion, our approach demonstrates the importance of community engagement in conducting effective and impactful projects. And that's one of the things that drives us and drives our work. The picture on the left there is it's the CAB that we set up in 2023, which had quite a number of people from various backgrounds, from social workers to community members to people who work for the Department of Health to just people from the traditional healer practitioner sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Masingita, and congratulations. Well, amazing work your team is doing. Guys, there's not much time left for questions, but we'd like to open it to questions. Those who have to drop off, and amongst them is me, I have to leave at 12:30. We will still be carrying on. Stacey will be carrying on as moderator if there's still questions after the half hour. So anybody with urgent questions? Anybody see, I'm looking in the chat where I saw from Nigeria, somebody wanted to know if they could be part of the AFRICAB and how to get to become part of this.
Oh, that's a great question. Let me talk with the AfroCab colleagues to see if they're looking for new members. And I know they kind of think about geographic representation. So I'll contact them and then can get back in touch with AVAC to share the readout with the participants of the call. Thank you for your interest.
Thanks. So you can get his details from the chat. I know people have been asking me if this is recorded, as they have to leave early. And yes, it is being recorded.
And I think as long as the presenters are okay with it, we will also we'll sort of house all the presentations on the AVAC website, and that link will be sent around to everybody. So yes, all of this great information will be accessible. Just in the question about Nigeria, there was also a piece about, I believe, inclusion of people who inject drugs. So Erica, I don't know if you want to speak to, I think, and I'm pretty sure that was directed towards the Smart for TB, if you want to speak to that as well.
Oh, whether they're included in the research, like in the studies or in the community groups?
I would think both. Yeah, is that part of kind of the program?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. It hasn't been, a prioritized population in terms of inclusion in the research trials. We've mostly been focusing on closing gaps for pregnant and lactating women and individuals, and on children and people with HIV with lower CD4 counts. But I can go back and check the protocols and also send that as kind of part of the follow-up. I don't recall seeing a specific inclusion of people who inject drugs. And I know that this is a really important population, given vulnerabilities to HIV, TB, and Hep C and other comorbidities. So thank you for flagging that. And I will also look into, I know that is something that our regional CABs, especially the Eastern European, Central Asian region, they have a lot of overlap with kind of harm reduction and other injection drug work. And I believe there's also representation from those communities within AfroCap, but I'll look into that too as kind of a follow-up and send follow-up information on that. And thank you for highlighting that. It is a really important population that's often neglected, from research and also just from kind of broader policy discussions, and it's really important.
Yeah, exactly right. Thanks, Erica. We do have a couple of hands raised, so maybe over to those folks. Ezio?
Hi, everyone. This is Ezio Tavra from Rio de Janeiro. It's great to see Stephanie and Erica talking about the GPP, which is my Bible that I work with for such a long time, and I refer very often to that, and people have been revising, and we use that on a regular basis. But I think the good participatory practices definitively goes beyond the requirement to engage communities in the whole process of research. But the most important aspect is engagement in policy discussion. So the uptake of study results and discuss if that is interesting or not for the countries and the systems to be adopted. So this is the most important aspect, that we have to empower the communities on a long run. So I mean, we have been having a support from organizations and / institutions from different parts. I mean, the TB Alliance probably is the best example of continued investment in community engagement. And I am extremely happy to see that the Smart for TB progress in so many areas, and to see the colleagues moving on that. But to be absolutely frank in terms of how we are standing in terms of community engagement funding and needs, I mean, we still are very far from what we need, really far. I mean, we still see studies coming on with informed consent of 27 pages. We still are invited to engage in studies when the protocols are already decided, and that's very common. And often, like it happened really recent, when we are asked to provide a budget and a work plan to settle up community engagement, and according to the GPP, following the GPP model, I mean, people that happened to me like a week ago, that they come back to me and say, like, almost like, you should do that for free. I mean, they're offering like 3% of what we require. I mean, when we budget, we give a concept note which is approved, and then people come back and say, like, oh, we cannot pay for what you need to settle up a cab or a proper community engagement as the GPP requires, but we still want you to do work. So I mean, how is that? I mean, and how is that with people sitting on money? And I'm talking about donors who are involved and granted with money. So how does this is acceptable? I don't think it is. And we are struggling to have, I mean, we had published a letter earlier this year on Lancet saying, like, the improvement of funding, for example, in Brazil, and community engagement, etc. But also, we are still so far from the needed funding for implementing significant and consistent community engagement and power in parts.
Ezio, can I respond to that?
Yeah, sure. But just to end, which is very important, I think the GPP has a fundamental role to for those countries which do not count with a system that provides community input into policies. I mean, the GPP is the best way to do that, to assure that will happen at some point, that there will be some capacities from the communities to be discussing policy and implementation with their respective governments. So, I mean, we have to continue funding that. We have to push that, and we have, we have been discussing that with Stephanie and with Erica for a long time. I mean, the GPP, the 2012 GPP on TB should be revised, as Erica used to say. I mean, it's supposed to be a living document. We have to readapt and continue that, but we still are very far from what we need in terms of funding and recognition by the donors that this work is needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ezio. And for those of you on the call who don't know Ezio, he was really, I think, one of the pioneers of TB community engagement and research. So really appreciate your perspective. And I completely agree. And I just wanted to kind of share my perspective of kind of having I joined Smart for TB about 1.5 years ago. Before that, most of my career was, in advocating for inclusion of communities in TB research. And for me, it's been really interesting to be a part of a research network that has a funding commitment for community engagement and has this as kind of one of the primary points of the mission, and seeing how it gets operationalized. And, there is still a long way to go. So I really, agree with everything you're saying, Ezio. And, one of the challenges that we're facing is even with, a very large project, we still don't have enough funding to kind of do everything we would want to do. One of the things that we were hoping to do was actually to work with Ezio at the outset and kind of really build up a more comprehensive approach to the site level community engagement. And because of budget constraints, even in this really large project, what we've wound up doing is kind of working with sites that are already already have community engagement capacity and kind of funding that. But we are kind of running into some challenges about some of the sites that don't already have CABs, and making sure that we have enough investments being made so that they can build up that work. So Stephanie and I are actually going to be talking about that after this call, just to make sure we really do this as comprehensively as possible. But even things, Ezio, to your point about not being able to look at protocols kind of early enough, like I am seeing, being part of a research kind of consortium now, I am seeing just how some of these things fall through the cracks, even with like the best intentions. It's not always kind of built into everybody's thinking and building in enough timelines, and the study teams are under a lot of different pressures, and that's something that we're really working towards. But, I'm just seeing that even in a group that is as dedicated as could be, I think, to the principles of GPP. So I think you're totally right, and I agree this needs to be like normalized and funded more. And I also think maybe it's something that we could work on collectively in terms of building out this like amazing GPP library of resources that AVAC is hosting. Can we have more guidance on like how much funding is needed and what specifically needs to be funded, and how the kind of research flow needs to work and how this does impact timelines, because I think it does make research a lot stronger, but it does take a little bit more time to get protocols through when you do a more consultative process and things like that. So all of that to say, I completely agree. I think there's more work that needs to be done kind of from all of us to make sure that this happens. So thank you for raising that. And I think Stephanie and maybe Masingita have other things to add to that too.
Just really quickly, and thank you so much, Erica. I'm totally behind that response 100%. And I think as we see more and more research happening, especially through consortia, this is going to get more and more complicated, but more comprehensive. So one of the biggest pieces of good news is that we are seeing that this is considered best practice. So we are not seeing, that we have to really convince more of our partners in TB-R&D that we need to do community engagement. We're more kind of trying to figure out how best to do it. And funding is critical, and understanding how best to support engagement at multiple levels is what we really need to focus on. So across multiple partners and consortia, I think that now we see that multiple models of engagement are going to work. There's something really interesting happening that we're going to be learning from Smart for TB in this like multiple level strategy of regional and site level and global. And, the model that we've been using for so long is one aspect, but also, it's so important that we're engaging at global and regional levels as much as we possibly can too, but they're not primarily the models that we've been using to engage. One of the things that I think I'd love to think about in GPP reframing is how we talk about engagement for clinical trials, and as not just a capacity development activity, because I think that's where we really get stuck in terms of funding this as an activity for clinical trials, but as a critical part of clinical operations, and it really is. And I think that we have enough body of evidence to show that there are key aspects to the early planning, the early implementation, the implementation of clinical trials and outcomes that justifies this kind of investment. And as I said before, the legitimacy of this kind of work stream that is critical to clinical operations that does require its own kind of budget stream for this kind of work. And we're still kind of falling short on putting some kind of ring-fenced funding around that for every clinical trial project. But I think the hope is across multiple sponsors like Smart for TB, TB Alliance, Unite for TB, all the IMI projects and all of this, if we're all kind of working together to support models of engagement, that ultimately there will be a boosted, supportive model that is kind of across TB-R&D altogether. And we can continue learning to boost that across our projects. But I'll stop there because I know it is not perfect.
Mm-hmm. It's a much longer conversation than 90 minutes as we're seeing. Masingita, we are over time. We will continue to record this, and I know people need to jump off. Masingita, do you have any quick thoughts on this issue?
Not necessarily, but I think my interest is looking at opportunities beyond. So, for example, we took the model and we tried to test it outside just TB trials. And one of the things that I find interesting is the fact that there's a greater buy-in from other funders. We're currently using it for our Accelerate 2 project, and we integrated that component into the actual response to the call for proposal as an activity. So I think there's a lot of lessons that we've learned from there that we can translate into opportunities for other people to tap into and say, how do we look into other opportunities? And I think that I spoke about collaboration and also a little bit about sharing resources. And we find it useful sometimes to tap into existing resources within communities that we work in. Some of them have actually become stagnant because people are not capacitated to use those strengths. And this ranges from people to facilities to, quite a number of things. So I think also just trying to look outside the box and look at other opportunities outside will help. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. There were a couple of specific questions that did come in. So I want to put those out there and then we'll wrap up. So first of all, Erica, for you described this sort of model of Smart for TB, of the kind of the CAB lab, and really kind of working with existing advocates, existing sort of community representatives. But it being sort of the kind of research literacy and the TB research literacy being new to them, and just wondering if you have what's your sort of secret to success? Because I think we all know, research literacy is so fundamental to GPP, but it's really hard. It's so much easier said than done. So curious if you have kind of any sort of secret tips there. And Stephanie, while I'm asking questions, Stephanie, I think for you, this it was really striking, this sort of model of direct funding for community engagement programs from TB Alliance that is not specifically tied to trials. And I mean, this is just sort of a long-standing conversation, right? Because the funding has to follow the trials, and so what are your kind of secrets to success there, and what do you think are kind of the barriers for sponsors in doing that, in kind of implementing that kind of a model? So maybe whoever wants to jump in first.
I'm happy to answer the question. I don't think we have a secret. I think it's the things that we kind of always know work, which is, a real investment of like time and capacity and resources. And I don't think there are a lot of shortcuts here. It'll be really interesting to see when we make the CAB lab kind of more broadly available. I think it will be really interesting to see, what the uptake is and what the impact is in terms of having more kind of people who feel capacitated and engaged in TB research as a result of that. I think that'll be a really interesting kind of test to see how much having these kind of materials and resources can help, because my hypothesis would be, like, I think it's actually really kind of the relationships with the CAB lab and the investments that they're putting in, with the regional CABs themselves, not the CAB lab. I think the CAB lab is really helpful to make like the information available and give them kind of a space for learning in a way that's accessible and kind of makes sense and meets their needs. But that's just one element of kind of, funding these groups. There was a pretty rigorous selection process to think about groups that like really had the capacity to engage in the ways that we were considering, that expressed a real interest, in research and in TB and kind of expanding their work into those domains. And these were groups that like, had been kind of tried and true in terms of their advocacy before, and had, reputations that like preceded them. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how it works in kind of using the same resources with a broader community that isn't receiving that same kind of support. In addition to like the regional CABs and all of the value that they're bringing, we also, as Smart for TB, we work with Treatment Action Group, and they have a full-time position that's basically just dedicated to community engagement, and the bulk of that is liaising with these regional CABs. So they're getting a lot of kind of hands-on support, and there's me on kind of the study engagement side, and then there's someone from TAG who's liaising directly with the CABs. And so there's also all of this kind of like a supportive environment, I would say, for engaging in this work and kind of helping manage study flows and, making it clear when it's time to engage, and also doing that kind of internal advocacy with the other internal stakeholders that need to be sharing this information. So sadly, I don't think that we've like cracked any secret. I think it's the traditional answer of like, it takes work and resources to do it. But I give a lot of credit to the CAB members themselves for their interest and for their engagement in it. Over to you, Steph.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Erica. And so looking forward to learning more from how that model is working. And just second that it does take human resources at every level, and it's a team effort, and small teams are hard to work with, but everybody puts a lot of effort into it. I just want to clarify, I think the funding CE programs directly is still tied to clinical trials. Whether or not it's directly to sites or through a clinical trial budget, it is tied to a specific clinical trial, and we as a sponsor can't fund a community engagement program for a clinical trial if it's not directly related to that. I think that being able to separate it from the budget of a clinical trial gives us a lot more freedom to start early. When we select sites, we've been working with a network of sites for a very long time. So we have a benefit when we know we're working with another clinical trial site, with a trial site that we worked with before. We have a benefit of being able to support them in a sustainable way between trials. They may be able to connect their funding from CE from the end of one trial results being disseminated very close to the startup of another trial. It may not be directly linked. It may just be a short gap, but they've been engaged long enough that they, even with a small gap, may be able to sustain their own engagement. It's very challenging when you're bringing on new sites, and there are still barriers, when you want to do that early engagement, introducing clinical trials to a community for the first time, you want to do it before, you're starting enrollment for the first time. You want to do it after you've gotten all your district level approvals and you've started meeting with your clinics that you're going to be recruiting from. And you don't want to wait until the site has been initiated. That seems too late. But sometimes when we're bringing on a new site, and we do struggle with getting all of those things in place, it's hard to get a new site up and running. And sometimes we do have barriers with getting that funding started, especially if we're starting a brand new community engagement program and orienting that team to using new tools, work planning and budgeting tools that we've been using with other sites, and working with them to build a work plan of the same model that we've been using with other sites. It can take a longer period of time. But overall, over the course of, the program overall, it's been mostly a sustainable model. And for most sites that have done multiple clinical trials, either with TB Alliance or across multiple partners that have done TB drug clinical trials, they have been able to sustain their activities. Some sites have even, because they've been, I don't want to say forced, but because, they're getting funding to do CE and they have to report directly on their activities, they themselves have to take the responsibility for it. It's not just us taking responsibility as a sponsor, but it's the local PI, it's the local finance team having to report back on their CE activities. And they have found that to be quite a benefit to them. And some sites have then taken it upon themselves to supplement their own programs because they know how well it's working for them. So it's, a site-by-site story and an effort, and there are barriers for sure, but it is by clinical trial. We can't unfortunately sustain it, but yeah, forever.
Yeah, well, yeah, therein lies the question, right? I guess, or but thanks for both of those responses. And I think, it's what I'm hearing so clearly from all three of you is that this is, GPP or community engagement really is, it's, I think, typically seen as a sort of broad kind of monolithic type of thing, but, the getting the work done and doing it well and ensuring that it is, as you said, Stephanie, in the beginning, truly, strengthening the clinical trials process and we're making research better. It's all about the nuts and bolts. And I think this kind of commitment from multiple stakeholders, from funders all the way down to kind of putting in the work that we need to put into is really, so key, and something that I think unfortunately does get overlooked sometimes. And I think is really sort of a through line through all of these discussions we want to have in this webinar series. So again, I think we're gonna wrap up, but I did want to give you all 30 seconds each to just sort of say, one final word. I think that this theme of GPP not being about the clinical trial and this sort of through line of making sure that, engagement does happen from the earliest stages of kind of research conceptualization all the way through to kind of implementation and global access is so key, and is an area that we still need to kind of figure out. And so I'd love to kind of hear, in a perfect world, what should we do next to kind of strengthen GPP from discovery to delivery? Oh, and I'll call on people first. I'm gonna just go to you, Steph, because you're unmuted.
I'll try to be really short. Let's just partner more. I think, the more R&D is happening, I think the more opportunities we have to learn from each other and just build on best practice and expand, fill the gaps that we have, because I think that we do. The more we are actually developing new products and introducing them, the more we're going to learn what's working best in TB drug R&D specifically, and the introduction of TB drugs specifically. So let's work together to expand the understanding of best practice for this space.
Thank you. Masingita.
I believe there's a lot of institutional memory, in quite a number of organizations, and this is the wealth, and it's out there, and platforms like this. And also we had a community engagement forum in Durban last week, thanks to Stephanie and TB Alliance. But it's an opportunity to tap into other people's knowledge and take that and use it to improve in terms of, we learned a lot last week, and I believe that if that knowledge is kept within one person, it's lost information. And platforms like this assist in terms of, learning, using that information. And by now it should be even considered best practice if, the outcomes have been positive. So yeah, that's my last word, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you. Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And I think when I think about where we're at, you know, as Stephanie said, I feel like we have kind of gotten to a point in TB trials where people recognize the need for engaging communities, but I think really operationalizing that and kind of going to the how, moving from the why to like the how, and to actually doing it, and to doing it early and not on enough, and to do it with enough resources to really do it properly, and to really kind of meaningfully incorporate any feedback received from communities. I think that's where I see kind of the biggest need here.
Great. Well, wonderful way to close us off. But just to remind everyone, this is not the end, and we do have. I just put a link in the chat for the page that gives information on the full series, and would really encourage everyone. Our next one is on June 27th, and it's actually going to be taking a look at kind of some of the monitoring and evaluation issues around GPP and community engagement, which again I think has come up in your presentations and these conversations, and I think links so much to I think the needs that we've talked about here. So really looking forward to continuing that. And again, just thank you so much to these incredible speakers, to the commitment from the TB field to doing this work, and how you've just been such leaders in it. And thanks to everyone behind the scenes who's helped make this webinar happen. And we really look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much, Stacey.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thank you, Stacey.